experienced in numinous phenomena to assist him. No guide, guru, priest, initiated shaman, or analytical psychologist to offer direction or give support, and certainly no one to interpret his dreams and visions. He devoted himself to the task. Not long after the series of visions that anticipated the impending world war, the vision of the murder of Siegfried brought Jung to ask himself whether such a vision might mean that he must commit suicide. In the dream, Jung murders Siegfried, an act that greatly disturbed his sense of value for the heroic endeavor that had characterized his own life up to that point. A redeeming insight finally presented itself. He realized that the dream suggested that he was called to dispense with his self-satisfied and highly adept professional persona that expressed the heroic, inquisitive, and ambitious youth who had encountered many challenges and accomplished a venerated expertise. That's a long sentence. I'm going to reread it. A redeeming insight finally presented itself. He realized that the dream suggested that he was called to dispense with his self-satisfied and highly adept professional persona that expressed the heroic, inquisitive, and ambitious youth who had encountered many challenges and accomplished a venerated expertise. He felt compelled to submit himself humbly to the inner imperative that was making itself known within him through a perpetual enactment of dreams and visions. The wisdom of his soul obliging him to listen and to learn its laws and to expose himself to its judgment, ripe for discovery and integration into consciousness, beckoned him. Just such a process describes the task of initiation. Language pertinent to experiences of initiation permeates the many dreams and visions. You can tell I'm not a professional reader. I apologize for that. Language pertinent to experiences of initiation permeates the many dreams and visions disclosed and elaborated in the Red Book. A successful initiation embodies 3 essential phases: the call to attend, a struggle culminating in crisis, and a curing renewal. Jung's poetic yet intellectual discourse boldly reveals his awareness of a call, an invitation, an imperative to return to soul, to his inner life and its vital striving to develop a transcendent function of consciousness, an expanded attitude toward life. Consider, for instance, quote, as soon as the main function is deposed, there is a chance for other sides of the personality to be born into life. Unquote. What happens when the main function, one's typical and conditioned attitude toward life, i.e., everything a person means when enlisting the pronoun I, is submitted to scrutiny along with the terrifying yet ineffable beauty of the numinous? When an individual encounters such a summons, The ego consciousness, whose primary interest resides in maintaining its own power in the state. When an individual encounters such a summons, the ego consciousness, whose main interest resides in maintaining its own power in the status quo, will resist, dig in its heels, refuse to move, and finally hold on for dear life. Psychic energy previously available for outer life flows inward, and one feels lack of enthusiasm, vigor, volition, i.e., libido or life energy. Thoughts of suicide may break into consciousness and lurk amid the fear, even though such thoughts intrude uninvited. This is a destroyer, the outer life circumstance that Anyway, welcome to the reading. This is a warts and all reading, which will be edited, so I apologize. This is a destroyer, the outer life circumstance that necessitates some kind of intimidating change, brings a person against an obstacle, a seemingly impenetrable wall of indecision that always arrives through an act of fate. Such a challenge, which is often disguised as catastrophe, includes any situation that drastically changes the current state of things, a loss of love, profession, health, or a combination of these. One first responds with resistance. The prospective initiate, feeling frightened and alone, will very often seek refuge in familiar habits. A variety of addictions, many of which provide the additional security of appearing healthy and even beneficial to self and world, provide the most readily available cover for the ego clinging to status quo. However, in any case, the familiar self will experience a fall, and feelings best described as some aspect of profound grief complicated by guilt will ensue. Jung's predisposition toward curiosity led him to, quote, take on the poverty of spirit in order to partake of the soul, unquote. Such a decision may sound perplexing, but anyone who crosses the threshold of addiction and or grief has already entered into spiritual poverty. However, if one does take on poverty, i.e., embrace humility and submit to the fear and grief inherent in intense inner conflict, a way opens through which suffering may transform into meaning through exploration. Through answering the call of the soul, the initiate becomes chosen rather than victimized, purposeful rather than a prisoner of fate, a searcher for meaning rather than a follower of creeds or any other preconceptions. Welcome to all who are listening. I have to turn off my cell phone because I keep getting all these darn notifications. So there. Members of traditional cultures who enter into the ritual of a shamanic initiation have already suffered the throes of confrontation by unseen forces, often since childhood. Rites include the task of traversing a tortuous underground passage that leads to a larger chamber where isolation creates conditions that almost certainly foster spiritual torture, i.e., torture experienced as a scourge by destructive spirits. Jung, explaining his trial, uses a tone of warning juxtaposed with challenge and hope. Quote, everything will come to you and you will be spared nothing, the mercy and the torment. the mercy and the torment, unquote. Through courageously withstanding the burden of some version of dismemberment, traditional initiates report experiences of mysterious a mysterious enantiodromia, a process by which an extremely polarized situation or attitude becomes its own opposite. Torture by complete skinning and scattering of bones, disembowelment, or dissolution carried out by destructive spirits becomes rememberment, replacement of bowels by adamantine stones, or molding of a purified body by constructive spirits. Subsequently, the initiate experiences a changed attitude toward self, other, and life. Rebirth is achieved. Let's see. Okay. I'm just going to keep going here. I'll be happy as I look up to respond to any comments or questions that you may have in the chat. Without the benefit of time-honored ritual, persons in our time most often experience the soul's periodic attempt at renewal as an acute ebbing of life energy that has been reaching outward into a myriad of projects and interests, flows back into the unconscious, a backward movement that results in confusion, lack of interest in typical ventures, and general malaise. The medical community will often gather such symptoms into a diagnosis of depression. Medications prescribed may bring a feeling of relief. Medications prescribed may bring a feeling of relief for a time. The individual may explore alternative courses of action and will sink down into the wisdom within, or alternatively continue through life without confidence, without clear intention, and without broad perspective, not to mention developing a dependence on pharmaceuticals. A deafening call of the soul for expanded experience, expression, and attitude toward life has sounded, but without words. If the individual resists overwhelming temptation to chase after the empty promises of quick relief and turns attention to the place where energy now resides, to the inner self, a wealth of images will coalesce to form a symbolic passage out of the initiatory chamber, the unconscious. No matter how much time one routinely spends in meditation, prayer, yoga, or religious commitments, time in the initiatory chamber exacts a release of preconceptions and a relinquishing of habits. One must devote time and attention to the images and messages, no matter how frightening or immoral or heretical, and follow their lead through the assorted solitary activities that amplify the particular dilemma at hand. It all starts with turning one's curiosity to the calling, which typically makes itself known through complicated life situations that seem to have no solution, very often accompanied by unexpected inner experiences such as dreams or visions. Loss of appetite or other responses of the body may ensue, limited attention to detail, difficulty focusing, and unusual struggle with organization and unusual struggle with organizational skills may trouble cognitive functioning. Abbreviated enthusiasm of previously enjoyable activities may torment one's emotional state. A person who experiences loss also experiences the challenge of confronting a trial that will move according to an ancient initiatory pattern. Life-altering confrontations with every conviction, presupposition, and indisputable law that one holds unassailable will come into play. Again, the question arises, how is it that a 21st century individual may hope to weather such a call? The answer, one faces up to the imperative to sacrifice precious time, which most often also means financial resources, in order to contain the enormous tension of an inner war between preconceived positions and the knowledge of oneself, which promises to defy many collectively held notions, all the while suspending a fierce desire to discover a solution. Nietzsche's maxim, idleness is the beginning of all psychology, unquote. Nietzsche's maxim, quote, idleness is the beginning of all psychology, unquote, gains clarity during the challenge of a call. In order to commune with one's own soul, a person needs time and solitude during which to explore the inner cosmos. Furthermore, an individual in the world of today greatly improves chances of success of an initiatory cycle by employing a credentialed analytical psychologist. I guess that's Dr. Burns's. It's Kate Burns. Okay, the author of this is Kate Burns, so I guess Dr. Burns is entitled to one advertisement. Anyway, this is an aside which only those of us who are hearing this will ever hear. The Red Book offers one man's experience, and it offers inspiration, wisdom, and hope. Jung's tireless search into the message. Sorry, I crack myself up sometimes. This is way too serious. Jung's tireless search into the messages contained in a wealth of images, as well as his meticulous research and recording of the messages revealed to him, offers witness to the courageous sacrifice, together with the abundance of reward inherent in devotion. Yet he again implores others not to try and imitate him. This play that I witnessed is my play, not your play. It is my secret, not yours. You cannot imitate me. My secret remains virginal, and my mysteries are inviolable. They belong to me and cannot belong to you. You have your own, unquote. You have your own, unquote. Jung's experience resembles a mythic underworld journey. He issues the imperative that one must go through the gate of the soul, quote, utterly poor, miserable, humiliated, ignorant, unquote. This is much like the journey of Inanna, goddess of beauty, desire, and political power in the ancient Sumerian pantheon. Who descends to the underworld through 7 gates and sacrifices a piece of who descends to the underworld through 7 gates and sacrifices a piece of her regalia at each gate, hurled into a state of the temporary madness characteristic of, quote, possession by unseen forces, unquote. The initiate faces a tense collision of opposites. Quote, everything serious is also laughable. Everything fine is also brutal. Everything good is also bad. Everything high is also low. Everything pleasant is also shameful, unquote. Here nothing makes sense, and everything is in flux. Sacrifice of everything previously held as reasonable and valid must be made in order to be released to roam freely with those things considered unreasonable and invalid. Jung says of sacrifice that it is the very reverse of regression. It is a successful canalization of libido. Every person who has been seized by creative madness knows the intensity of such a movement. Jung says to soul, quote, you weave the thickest darknesses, and I am like a madman caught in your net, but I yearn, teach me, unquote. Again, the reader receives something of a warning that finishes with heroic curiosity coupled with humble submission, willingness, and even yearning for connection to one's inner fountain, for reflection, for access to the unknown parts of oneself, furthers and expands experience of the full potential of oneself together with the knowledge of one's individual way, this journey we call life. Together with knowledge of one's individual way along this journey we call life. The initiate enters a state of crisis, which exacts how much longer this goes on here. Okay. The initiate enters a state of crisis, which exacts a need for razor-sharp discernment and pivotal decision. Everything that belongs to one's highest value wants rebirth and strives toward the west, like the sun that will rise anew in the east. When the struggle through the thickest darknesses apprehends the ego consciousness of a 21st century individual who knows little about how to negotiate what may seem like a horror, or at least like an innate yearning, societal structures, cultural traditions, and religious creeds offer little support. Solitude without electronics, attention to inner images, and time for play without toys would challenge to the core a modern person's A time for play without toys would challenge to the core a modern person's unacknowledged, even unrealized, addiction to constant diversion, abundant and expected, clamoring from all corners and every second of daily life experience. One needs time to emerge from a life-threatening One needs time to emerge from a life-threatening ordeal, whether from within or in outer life. Escape from constant commotion may prove impossible, but But to turn one's attention inward requires a simple about-face, a revolution, a turning around. In an ominous and frightening If an ominous and frightening creature chases one through the night, the one chased and running for dear life may merely turn around, whereupon the creature transfigures into a more amenable, even helpful image. Whereupon the creature transfigures into a more amenable, even helpful image. Similarly, if noise pollution, air pollution, and the disturbing eyesores of advertisement and industry chase one through the day, mindful inner awareness renders the intruders powerless. Jung realized that he, quote, must grope through what lies at hand, embrace the worthless and the worthy with the same love, unquote. Without the inward gaze, the devotional attention to the images of one's soul, in addition to having a dialogue with one other objective person who has experience and expertise, in addition to having a dialogue with one other person who has experience and expertise to foster interpretation of such images, no amount or cocktail of psychopharmaceuticals will ultimately change the situation that leads to a diagnosis of depression and/or anxiety disorder. The medical community debates endlessly the question of whether the medication even alleviates the symptoms of depression and anxiety after allowing for an initial honeymoon period of relief that can be attributed to a placebo effect. What one has cultivated in outer life in the most successful of circumstances eventually culminates in strivings achieved, goals attained, and recognitions collected on an undusted shelf. Ego consciousness attaches to its memories when the current environment starts to erode the image of oneself so tirelessly achieved. It cannot see the future, and the present stands permeated with an outworn identity longing to renew itself. Consider the professor who longs to write poetry, the doctor who longs to play music, the lawyer who longs to write a novel, the laborer who longs to carve flutes, the man who longs to become a woman, or the woman who longs to become a man. Little does one know that beyond the ongoing war between opposing forces from within, a garden awaits. An inner landscape beckons the one reduced by agonizing loss of everything once identified as myself to a mystery as vast and as fascinating as the limitless cosmos. I'm going to read that sentence again. Two sentences. Little does one know that beyond the ongoing war between opposing forces from within, a garden awaits. An inner landscape beckons the one reduced by agonizing loss of everything once identified as myself to a mystery as vast and as fascinating as the limitless cosmos. The soul invites inquisitive and thirsty wanderers to drink from the inner spring of renewal. Observe Louis Dinardo's words as he enlists Meister Eckhart in the film Jacob's Ladder. In this scene, he tries to soothe the main character, whose post-traumatic stress from wartime experience has landed him in a state of confusion between outer experience and his dreams. Quote, "The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away, but they're not punishing you. They're freeing your soul. If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. If you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth." Unquote. In the cave of initiation, the devils that tear apart the old body of everything one has become, but is no longer, those devils of destruction become angels of construction, forming a new body. Through enduring the greatest torture to become smelted anew in the connection with the primordial beginning, which at the same time is what has been and what is becoming, one emerges from adamantine strength to serve both soul and world. Nothing less and nothing more commanding than renewal conveys the cure. Rebirth brings a restoration of energy, but also necessitates tending. Rebirth brings a restoration of energy, but also necessitates tending, cultivation, devotion, mindfulness, and love. A curing rebirth brings one into a state of infant perspective, every bit as determined to proclaim itself, and every bit as fragile as a baby emerging from its mother's womb. However, in a world that denies and even denounces, and at best ignores, the evolving of an individual soul, renewed consciousness brings predictability. Renewed consciousness brings predictably an encounter with resistance. The ones who have accompanied the initiate thus far, companions, friends, family, or colleagues, now feel the presence of a stranger. In fact, the initiate who recently emerged from a time of struggle feels like a stranger to that person previously known as self. The rite of tonsure, shaving of the head, shaving of the head among assorted religious orders, offers an apt depiction of the nascent identity emerging to fill a life of devotion. Jung realized that to become and to continue becoming an authentic individual, only devotion to his own soul could free him. Transformation required Jung to lock the past with one key, with the other open the future. Then he reflects on what this process means for his life. Quote, "The miracle of transformation commands," "the miracle of transformation commands," unquote. What does this miracle command? It commands living a symbolic life, a life of integrity in which decisions emerge from careful consideration of polarizing influences, and where a spirit of faith in life and love prevails. Living one's cure impels embracing, in all humility, the way forward through darkness, because the future is always dark. If you look for a light, you fall first into an even deeper darkness. Current society offers little support for discerning one's own way. Western culture, which has gripped the world, provides much that may interrupt rather than further one's progress, much that needlessly limits the development of ideas rather than supporting their journey through the formulation and maturation and leading finally to manifestation. I'm going to read that sentence again. It got away from me. Current society offers little support for discerning one's own way. Western culture, which has gripped the world, provides much that may interrupt rather than further one's progress, much that needlessly limits the development of ideas rather than supporting their journey through formulation and maturation and leading finally to manifestation. Jung advises, quote, well-being is a better judge, unquote. I'll look at this comment. KJ says, does Jung, to my knowledge, interpret anywhere the significance of the oil which is used to anoint, like, for example, the stone which Jacob anoint with oil after his angel ladder's dream? I can't say that I clearly remember, but I suspect there is reference to that in Psychology and Alchemy, which is, I don't know, it's volume 12 or 13 of the collected works, because that turns out to be a kind of history of human consciousness, that book. And so I would suggest you look there. But if you are a member of our Dropbox, you would have access. You would have access to the collected works in electronic form in the Dropbox, and if you look in there in volume 20, which is the index for the entire collected works, you may be able to do a word search on it. So I'd urge you to take a look at that. And if you want to be, if you're not in the Dropbox and you're watching this, there's my contact information, which you're free to write me and ask for membership in our Dropbox. But that's the best I can answer that at the moment. Julie says, good afternoon, Skip. I recognize much of what you are reading today. Painting and long hikes have saved my soul for sure. Yep, and a few other things too, but have saved my soul. And you know, for the longest time, I didn't even realize I was saving my soul. So at least now I know that. So I'm going to take my contact information down. I'll give you another 5 seconds to write it down. And then, so if you're not a member of our Dropbox, write me a private message on email so that I have your email address, and I can add you to our Dropbox, and there you can find the collected works in electronic form, which is a huge value, obviously. And so this will be cut out of the final version of this video, but is for those of you who listen this far. Anyway, moving right along. Obviously, we also have an advanced reading group, which is meeting on Zoom, not on YouTube, every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And on that advanced reading group, we are studying, we're halfway through chapter 3, which is the Syzygy, and immediately after that, probably 2 weeks from yesterday, we'll probably be discussing chapter 4, which is the self. So anyway, Julie says, haha, not me either. You have helped me understand very much what was closed to me. Much gratitude. Boy, am I ever glad to hear that. I mean, obviously, I have done this pretty much as a labor of love, and I know that Dr. Jung's work has helped me very much throughout my adult life, and that's why I want to share that with others. So I'm delighted to hear that it's been helpful to you, very honestly. Okay, so moving on. I haven't quite finished this reading, so I think I will. I'm not sure if I've read this paragraph, but if I did, I can always cut it out. Continuing in a state of cure means intrepid self-care. It means knowing the desires of the innermost rather than chasing what glitters in a society tortured by greed. It means entering the stream of life, the joy and sorrow of living oneself. One emerges from the cave with the glow of an adamantine body, the wings of a dragon, wisdom through serpentine longing, and the acuity of a crow. Yet also one emerges as a beast of burden who serves its master, which is transformation. Emerging from the initiatory trial means you need and you're longing. Emerging from the initiatory trial means your need and your longing and your pain and suffering have birthed a new axis of meaning. You have sacrificed your cleverness in the world and have submitted to the simple-mindedness of the inner world in order to address and to engage with your soul. You have become the humble frog in order to converse with the dragon of wisdom, which harbors your own idea. In the midst of suffering and loss, a world weary. In the midst of suffering and loss, a world-weary individual bends a knee to something unknown that reveals itself through one's mindful attention. The ineffable unknown, which defies description, bathes in love the one who searches for healing balm. Life continues with renewed energy, purpose, resolve, perspective. The world again becomes a place that piques curiosity, stages the imagination, and fuels inspiration. Every initiation in every lifetime invites the initiate to embark upon the Every initiation in every lifetime invites the initiate to embark upon and cultivate a unique, sacred devotional path, clearing the enigmas along the way. The entire person, both conscious and unconscious components, faces an inner command to explore new avenues, to birth the self anew continually, so as to explore and develop a potential but unlived part of life. If one depotentiates the horror of thickness, if one depotentiates the horror of thickest darknesses by apprehending them and traversing their tortuous trails, the courageous initiate may discover a placid pond of enrichment, a new day of broader perspective. At the end of the Red Book, in a section called Scrutinies, Jung asked the question whether the work of redemption is imperative. Certainly not, he answers. If one can endure if one can endure a given condition and does not feel in need of redemption. Well, let me reread that. Certainly not, he answers, if one can endure a certain condition and does not feel in need of redemption. However, it seems that those who find themselves incarnated as human beings harbor a longing for meaning and purpose in life. One who cultivates an ability to endure a given condition sacrifices all hope of discovering meaning and purpose in life, a situation that leads to despair and even murder and or suicide. I'm going to start that again. So here he's talking about, or Dr. Burns is talking about one who learns to get along, get through, no matter what, adapt to the unacceptable. And so that's what the reference is. One who cultivates an ability to endure a given condition sacrifices all hope of discovering meaning and purpose in life, a situation that leads to despair and even murder and or suicide, the farthest extreme of untreated depression. The farthest extreme of untreated depression. Not through medications or herbs or specially formulated supplements, and not through the latest miracle diet, and not through the latest formulated workshop, and not through devoting oneself to any religious order anywhere does one find a cure for life's intrinsic suffering that has landed one in the throes of a Does one find a cure for life's intrinsic suffering that has landed one in the throes of a severe depressive episode? There is no panacea outside oneself for curing a sick soul. Only through entering the chamber of loneliness and defeat and accompanying one's longing does a person emerge from depths of fear and loathing and despair, carrying renewed enthusiasm like a talisman to continue the great foraging of life. Consider Jung's words cited above. Quote, "My secret belongs to me and cannot." Obviously, this touches some of my complexes. Consider Jung's words cited above. My secret belongs to me and cannot belong to you. You have your own. You have your own. These words both challenge us to the inner duel and encourage us with the hope of victory, of receiving the prize, of emerging with a renewed raison d'etre, a reason for being. Of emerging with a renewed raison d'etre, a reason for being. So that's the end of Dr. Bain's essay. There were a few things in the beginning of it that I left out because I wanted to emphasize the aspect of initiation in my reading. I think it's quite a beautiful essay, and it obviously moves me quite a lot, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. So let's see. Julie Westmacott says, frogs. I had a dream of a frog on my path. He opened his mouth and I pulled out a beautiful white kitten. Then I told the frog off and walked on. Well, that was probably the right answer, Julie. Obviously the frog was a symbol, and once the symbol serves its purpose, maybe it's not needed any longer. KJ says, actually, I'm too kind of surrounded by frog symbols for some time. Julie says, at the end of the dream, I had been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson. I think my dream was warning of too much logic and logos. And Julie says, very powerful, Skip. God bless you. Okay, I have some observations about Jordan Peterson, and along with him, Jonathan Pageau. So I'll share them with you since we're at the end of this hour or so that I've been doing this reading. And I'm still formulating this, but some months ago, as I was doing the reading group, I realized that the opposite of logos is not eros in the erotic sense necessarily, but it is it's life itself. And for one of our advanced reading group members, I was commenting on this morning, as a matter of fact. Jonathan Pageau does a wonderful job of explaining symbolism, and I highly recommend you looking for his discussion of the literal versus symbolic reading of the Bible. It's excellent. And I have to say that in all my studies of Jungian psychology, I never found a great definition of symbol by Dr. Jung. I never found a clear definition of what he was talking about. And I think that Jonathan Pageau did sum that definition up in that video, and so I urge you to take a look at that. However, Jonathan Pageau, there was a discussion between Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson and some others. Apparently it took place at an Orthodox church in probably around Toronto somewhere, about in the spring of last year. And it was called something like the Resurrection of the Logos or something like that. And Jonathan Pageau kept talking about these logi. And I had the realization that when he's talking about logi, he's trying to slice and dice and so on, because he's trying to provide definition in smaller and smaller detail. And I'm running into that in my Buddhist meditation group as well, where in Buddhism, they have sliced and diced everything. They're the 64 pieces of this and the 7 pieces of that and the 3 pieces of that and the 4 noble truths and so on. Everything is sliced and diced. And so yesterday I challenged my Rinpoche about this by saying, what about experience? Because he was emphasizing belief, and it finally came to me that all this slicing and dicing, all this logos and then logi and so on, all that slicing and dicing, that's all logos, but it's not experience. Okay, so um, the example I was talking about this morning, well, I quipped that Jonathan Pajot sounds like the guy who knows 150 ways to make love but doesn't know any girls. And I said, you can have the Kama Sutra and you can memorize it entirely, but if you don't have the experience that's described in the Kama Sutra, then all you have is just a book on your shelf in the end, and you haven't experienced or brought it into life. And so that's where all religions have failed us, failed humanity in general. And it's where we need to start to correct that problem, because all of them want you to believe, and they want to give you all these different methods of doing it, and it's all logos. I mean, the Bible is just a book. Even the Red Book is just a book, and even the collected works of Carl Jung are just books. They mean absolutely nothing unless you bring them into your life. And once you bring them into your life and experience what they're talking about, then maybe you are somewhat enlightened. And I go back to Edward Edinger's discussion in his essay, Encounters with the Greater Personality, which if you've listened to me before, you probably have the link. But let's see, I can probably put the link on this chat too, just so everybody has it. Whoops, I don't think I should use that tab for this. So that's my live stream tab. Okay, so Dr. Edinger was talking about encounters with the greater personality. And it seems to me that what he's talking about is basically encounters with life. And I think that we have constantly encounters with the greater personality. Many of us recognize that they're relatively common. They happen to us all the time, but most people don't see them and don't appreciate what they are. And even Anne Ulanoff, who did a great book on the psychoid layer, claims that the psychoid layer is not, you can't photograph it. And I beg to differ with her, because I did catch it twice on video during the reading group. And, what happened to me in those two experiences may not affect you. They may not be an encounter like you have ever had. But what I'm doing is I'm pointing at something. There's also there's a playlist on this YouTube channel called Breakthroughs to the Unconscious. And in that playlist, I not only have put those two experiences, but I also put a static one where I took a picture. I took two photographs, still photographs, in the U.S. Naval Academy Chapel when there was another of those experiences, and I describe it. And when you look at those things, you can start to appreciate what I'm talking about, I hope. Anyway, so Julie says she's been following Jonathan for a while. Very beautiful. I have either you or Jonathan on whilst I paint. Thank you so much for your important thoughts. I'm realizing that part of me enjoys some. Well, it can be enjoyable, and I'm humbled that I can be compared to Jonathan Peugeot, because I think he's done a lot of thinking, and he's a very smart young man. He is he's basically teaching the party line of Orthodox Christianity, which can only be taught through the Logos, as all religions can only be taught through the Logos. But in the end, the reason that religions fell out of favor with all the atheists is the atheists don't understand what's going on, what should be going on in religion, what should be the Logos is a path to get you to an experience. And the problem is the priests and the Tibetan Buddhist lamas and all those folks, they make their living by giving you teachings. And if you have the experience, then you have no need for a creed anymore, honestly. And so I think that Jonathan has is doing the world a great service by talking about symbolism, and so is Jordan Peterson, actually. But their limitation, what I'm understanding is their limitation, is that they're entirely stuck on the Logos side of the equation, and they're not willing to. I mean, they talk about experience, but Jonathan Peugeot and his discussion of Logos in that, the renewal of the Logos discussion with Jordan Peterson, he's talking about lots of experiences, but he's not recognizing that what he's talking about are experiences. They're not logi, they're not logic, they're not rational things. They're things that you have to experience in order to understand them, to grok it. Chaos, we have to have chaos in our lives, that's for sure. Julie says, you have the life experience that Jonathan doesn't. Well, Jonathan does have life experience. I mean, in one of those videos, in the video in which he discussed the literal and symbolic interpretation of the Bible, he gives an example of a synchronicity that occurred to him, which involved the pregnancy of his wife for his fourth child, and it's quite humorous in a way, and that certainly was a life experience for him, but he simply hasn't understood it as an experience, as a religious experience per se, or at least an experience of the eros side. And this is where we have problems. Okay, so that's quite a few videos on the Tarot that are absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Yes, the Tarot is another Logos kind of thing. I mean, those videos are all Logos because I'm teaching the Tarot, but a Tarot reader, an intuitive Tarot reader, can connect with everyone that is in a hall, let's say. And it isn't because of any specific thing. It's an experience that people have. It's an eros thing. It's not erotic. And here's where we have our problem, because eros kept being denied, and the feminine principle kept being denied because I think society was having a lot of problems with sexuality. I mean, even Emma Jung had problems on both sides. She had problems with her father because her father caught syphilis and was dying of syphilis, and so when Jung came into her life, he was dealing with her father's syphilis, and later on she was dealing with cultural ideas of how people's life should be between husband and wife. And it's interesting if you read the biography of Emma Jung. It's called Labyrinths, I think. It's an excellent book, and I discussed it for several weeks on the reading group, so you can find that. It was said that she was the most individuated person in the room whenever anybody went to the psychology club of Zurich back in the 20s and 30s, and I certainly believe that. So Julie says she thinks that the kitten in my dream was my chaos. I rescued it from the frog. Well, that's good. I wouldn't attempt to interpret another person's dreams, but if that's what it means to you, that's fine. Let's see. Lewis Oscar says, Skip, thanks for the reading. I really appreciate your time spent. May I ask you if there is much about the natal chart in the Red Book? I think I presume you're talking about something in astrology, and I'm not an expert in astrology, Lewis Oscar, but what I would say is there is a lot in the Red Book about astrology and about the significance of astrology. And let's see, KJ says, I've come across an astrological description of time of Christ's birth by Jung in Ion. Just want to know, does Jung have more work on astrology, and what is your opinion about it? Okay, well, Jung talks about astrology quite a lot, and astrology is not a place where I'm very strong, but a very famous astrologer, this is the other book from that series, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Volume 1. Okay, and in Volume 1, there's a very famous astrologer who's written an essay here. Her name is Liz Green. Probably many of you know her. She wrote many books, and her essay is the second essay in the book, and it's called The Way of What Is to Come, Jung's Vision of the Aquarian Age. And so I'm not a big astrology follower. I don't believe astrology is, I don't know. I don't believe it's magical, okay? I don't believe the tarot is magical, but I do believe that there is truth in it, okay? And as there is truth in the tarot. In other words, if I walk into a room and throw my tarot cards across the stage in an auditorium with 1,000 people, and everyone will give me the benefit of the doubt, I can do a reading right off the floor without any special layout, and every person in the room will think I did a reading for them. But the issue is that every person in the room will have heard a different reading, because the tarot is full of the archetypes. And so when I say the word mother, then everybody has a mother, and so everybody is going to connect with that expression, and that's the Empress card. So whatever I say about that mother, you'll hear it, and if you've got something going on with your mother at that particular time, it'll connect with you, and you say, oh my God, he knows about my mother. But I don't know about your mother. I know that if I read and mention an archetypal form like mother, everyone will have a relationship with it. That's what I know as a tarot reader. And so with astrology, I do believe that astrology must have come up from the deep depths of the ancient past. Okay, even before the so-called ancient world. Keep in mind that at 500 BC, which is the time of Job, there were 100 million human beings on the planet already. By that time, there were 100 million human beings. And so those human beings had developed over thousands of years ways of trying to explain their world. And those ways came up astrologically. And exactly like the tarot, when things come up and they seem true, they survive. And when they don't seem true, people forget them. And so, there are certain aspects of astrology which I'm sure come out as true. And the same way many of you may have experienced going to a Chinese restaurant, and they'll put a placemat at your place which has the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac, and you'll be amazed at how much that animal that represents your year represents your personality or the way you are and in the world. And so those types of things were developed in China over thousands of years, and they have a certain truth in them. And the idea of something changing in the age of Aquarius, yes, they will. Okay, and the reason for that is that human beings have been saying that they would for the last 2,000 years or more, probably longer than that, far longer than that. And so, half the world is familiar with the astrological charts and have been talking about change coming. So at the unconscious level, at the archetypal level, change is coming. It is coming. It's happening. We can see it happening. And does that happen because of astrology? No. I mean, the movement of the stars is pretty random out there in the universe. The more we look at it, the more we know that. But the ideas that were presented by astrologers going back thousands of years, some of them had truth in them. And so when Dr. Jung refers to the astrological chart representing the beginning of the Aquarian age, he's not talking about some mechanism that's out in the universe, from an astrological point of view, out in the universe, that is going to cause the change. He's talking about something that's going on in the unconscious, in us, that's going to cause that change. And that change exists. I'm convinced that it exists. And you have to appreciate that the psyche is real. And if you appreciate the psyche is real and the collective unconscious is real and archetypes are real, then there's no doubt that there is truth in astrology per se. Okay, so at least that's a extemporaneous speech on my perspective on astrology, for what it's worth. Anyway, astrology does permeate Dr. Jung's work, and you can especially find it in the in the essays and books on alchemy. Mean Joe Hicks says, "Hi Skip, have you ever had experiences with psychedelics? They seem to reinforce the need for the feminine and eros. I'm curious if you have any input on this topic. It blows my mind how wide-ranging the amount of topics, even those that seem obscure, that are relevant when talking about Jungian psychology in his life." Certainly, that's true. As far as the psychedelics are concerned, I do not have any experience with psychedelics myself. I do have experience with alcohol, and what I can say is that my perspective is that things like psychedelics, like alcohol, tend to cause permeation of the transcendent function. Okay, in other words, allow things to get through from the unconscious to the conscious mind. The example is visions that drunks sometimes have, delusions and visions, and you can see there's a recent popular advertisement, or I don't know if it's popular, but it's an advertisement for a drug for what is it called? I forget the disease right now. I can't put my finger on it. Parkinson's disease. Okay, so Parkinson's disease. So there's a drug for Parkinson's disease, which is advertised on television. And in this advertisement, they're talking about the fact that people who have Parkinson's disease often have delusions or visions. And that's also covered in the movie A Beautiful Mind, where I think it's John Nash's experience with schizophrenia, where he tends to have visions. And so, I think that psychedelics do open up the unconscious. It's not always a good idea. And if you look at the essay by Dr. Edinger, he talks about the danger of opening up the unconscious. I would urge upon anyone who's listening to this to be very careful about opening up the unconscious. There's a lot there. And I know I've had very real visioning experiences. Many of you probably know that I had an 8-month long experience which emerged as a novel. And when I was going through that experience, I just thought I was writing a novel. And I thought I was having the kind of experience that a great author might have, and the kind of experience that people who have writer's block, they can't get back to that place in themselves to come up with another book. And so for me, I just thought I had opened a kind of fountain from my psyche that allowed me to write this novel, and that is what happened. But it emerged as a vision over an 8-month period, and it just scared the tar out of me, honestly, because when this happened in 1993, part of that novel came across as what we would euphemistically call erotica. Okay, and I was in the middle of my business career at that time, and I didn't necessarily want to have my person associated with pornography, and so I put the novel in a drawer. But I do know that what came out in that novel was extremely powerful to people who have read it, and it is I consider it the autobiography of my anima, and there are shadow elements in it, and there are self-animate elements in it, as in the archetype of the self. But I know that now in the fullness of time. I didn't know it when it was happening to me. And it was, in the same sense that Jung had visions of World War I, and then World War I started, and he goes, "Oh, phew, I'm not crazy." And so I had that same type of experience when the Red Book came out, because I said, "Oh my God, Dr. Jung had experiences like I had experiences back in '93." So that was 16 years after my personal experience. And so that certainly drew me even deeper into Jungian psychology, which I was already deeply in, because the novel, what happens is, if you start to think about the archetypes and start to talk about these things, visions and dreams can start to come up, and you need to be prepared for that and to understand that that's what's happening. And that's why it's very important to look at Dr. Edinger's essay, which I linked on this chat. And so if you, because then you can understand what it is. And so I had this experience when his Red Book came out. I said, "Oh, phew, I'm not crazy. If that happened to Dr. Jung, I guess that's good enough for me." And then I got into Dr. Jung's direct work much more deeply after that. My wife is a very smart lady, and she refused to read my novel until I had had 10 other women read it. And that seemed like a high hurdle for me. But, nonetheless, it so happened that I worked in an industry that was largely women. And so I did have, ultimately, I had more than 100 women read it at my request, and every one of them that ever gave me a response to this novel said they loved it. And so, maybe there are some that were hiding their criticism, but I never heard a criticism of it. So, as much as it does include erotica and so on, I don't think I'm causing anybody any problem by reading it. And it is, I don't sell it, by the way. If you have access to the Dropbox, you have access to the novel, which is written under my pen name, which is David Garrettson. And I'll just put that here. I have written 4 books that are on Amazon. 2 of them are under this pen name, and 2 are under my personal name. So let's see. Julie says, Dimitri Halley, Jungian physiologist, says that most drugs are a gateway to possession. Yeah, that may be. I believe that. And I think ring effect in Lord of the Rings is kind of descriptive of this phenomenon. Somehow I never could get into the Lord of the Rings, but if you say so, KJ, I will accept it. Sometimes certain movies actually put me to sleep. I think my psyche becomes overwhelmed by them, and so when I watched the first Lord of the Rings movie, Even though there were these phenomenal noises and, battle scenes, you name it, I went to sleep in the middle of the theater. And I think that is maybe my psyche trying to protect me from something, or who knows. But, it happens in many of these dark movies, like Batman, the Batman series. If I go watch a Batman movie, I'll often go to sleep, and so I think that's a psychological response to overwhelming archetypal imagery, which maybe I know more about than a lot of people do, and so my psyche just says, let's protect ourselves from this. And I really don't have any urge to go back and find out what I missed. I mean, we do have subscribers on this channel who do a lot of analysis of movies, and I urge you to find those. And anyway, and some of them are in our advanced reading group. So anyway, all right, so I think I've commented on pretty much all the chat items that are here. And my main purpose for opening this up today was to read this from this book. I'm sorry, it's not that book. It's this book, which they both look alike, but Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, Volume 2. And I was reading from Kate Burns's essay. Kate Burns's essay, Soul's Desire to Become New, Jung's Journey, Our Initiation. And I was particularly reading from that essay, which I found quite beautiful, because a lot of young men have approached me recently talking about the lack of initiation in our society today. And I wanted to comment on initiation per se and help people understand from a psychological point of view what you need in initiation and what it is doing for you from a psychological point of view. And so I thought Kate Burns's essay was both beautifully written and very poignant on the issue of initiation. And it certainly, what she had to say certainly applies to the types of initiations I've gone through in terms of, official formal initiations, like becoming a Marine Corps officer, for example. She's bang on that, even though I'm sure she never served in the Marine Corps. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, and I am going to edit this video. I'm going to leave it in the behind the scenes playlist and the Q&A playlist, but I'm not going to put it on the Red Book playlist until I've edited it. So anyway, thank you for visiting today, and I'm going to discontinue the stream at this time. So thank you for joining.